"Get out if you don't like it," she screamed in front of her entire family on Christmas Eve, and that's exactly what I did. I never imagined that a holiday dinner would become the moment my marriage finally shattered, but looking back, maybe it was inevitable. I'm Kevin, a network security analyst living in Phoenix, and I'd spent 3 years walking on eggshells around my wife Miranda's family, particularly her mother Diane, who seemed to take personal offense to my very existence. Christmas Eve at the Rodriguez family home had always been a minefield, but this year felt different from the moment I walked through the front door carrying the carefully selected wine and homemade cookies I'd spent hours preparing. The extended family was there in full force, Miranda's siblings, cousins, aunts, uncles, and their children filling every corner of Diane's immaculate suburban home with its pristine white furniture and family photos that somehow never included me despite 3 years of marriage. I'd learned to position myself strategically during these gatherings, usually near the kitchen where I could help with dishes and avoid prolonged conversations with relatives who viewed me as the guy who wasn't good enough for their precious Miranda. The evening started predictably enough with Diane's passive-aggressive comments about my career choice, wondering aloud why anyone would want to spend their days staring at computer screens looking for imaginary threats when there were real jobs available in construction or sales. I developed a thick skin over the years, responding politely that cybersecurity was actually a growing field with excellent prospects, but Diane had perfected the art of making every response sound defensive. Miranda sat beside me on the couch, scrolling through her phone and occasionally laughing at TikTok videos while her mother continued her systematic dismantling of my professional accomplishments. When Uncle Roberto asked about my recent certification in cloud security architecture, I began explaining how it would likely lead to a promotion, but Diane interrupted with a loud scoff and announced to the entire room that I was still just playing with computers while real men were out building things with their hands. The conversation ground to an uncomfortable halt as 20-plus family members turned to witness what felt like a public execution of my character and career choices. I took a deep breath and calmly explained that network security analysts protect businesses from cyber attacks that cost companies millions of dollars annually, that my work involved designing systems that safeguard financial data and personal information, and that I took genuine pride in solving complex technical challenges that kept people's digital lives secure. Diane's response was swift and brutal, delivered with the confidence of someone who'd never been contradicted in her own home. That's just fancy talk for being worthless deadweight who contributes nothing meaningful to society. The room fell completely silent except for the sound of Christmas music playing softly in the background, and I felt every eye in the room watching to see how I'd respond to being called worthless deadweight in front of my wife's entire extended family. I looked at Miranda, expecting some form of support or defense, but she continued staring at her phone screen as if the conversation wasn't happening, her thumbs moving across the display in a rhythm that suggested she was actively texting someone. When I gently placed my hand on her arm and said her name, she finally looked up with an expression of pure irritation and snapped that I was being too sensitive and making everyone uncomfortable. I realized in that moment that I was completely alone in a room full of people who either actively disliked me or were too intimidated by Diane to speak up on my behalf. And when I quietly suggested that perhaps we could discuss family dynamics more privately, Miranda exploded with a fury I'd never seen before. She stood up from the couch so quickly that her wine glass toppled over, staining the white fabric, and screamed that I was embarrassing her family, that I couldn't just accept criticism like a man, and that if I didn't like how things worked in her house, I should get out immediately. The violence of her reaction shocked everyone present, including several of the children who started crying, but what devastated me most was seeing her mother's satisfied smile as she watched her daughter publicly humiliate me on Christmas Eve. I stood up slowly, looked around the room at faces that ranged from uncomfortable to smugly pleased, and calmly told Miranda that I'd be happy to leave if that's what she truly wanted. I gathered my jacket, wished everyone a Merry Christmas, and walked to my car while Miranda continued shouting from the doorway about how I always had to make everything about myself and couldn't just let things go for once in my life. The drive home to our shared condo felt surreal, Christmas lights blurring past as I processed what had just happened and wondered how my marriage had deteriorated to the point where my wife would publicly demolish me rather than show even basic respect. When I arrived at our empty apartment, I sat in my car for several minutes, realizing that Miranda had chosen her family's approval over our marriage, and that this moment had revealed something fundamental about who she really was when forced to choose sides. I finally went inside, poured myself a drink, and tried to understand how someone I'd loved for years could treat me with such contempt in front of the people who mattered most to her. But the real shock came when I picked up our shared iPad to check my email and discovered months of text messages between Miranda and her mother discussing divorce proceedings, custody arrangements that didn't apply to us since we had no children, and strategies for getting rid of Kevin that dated back to early October. The messages revealed that tonight's explosion hadn't been spontaneous anger but rather a calculated performance designed to make me look like the problem while positioning Miranda as the victim of an unreasonable husband who couldn't get along with her family, and I realized that I'd been living with someone who'd been planning to destroy our marriage for months while pretending everything was normal. I didn't wait for Miranda to come home and continue the charade because I'd already seen enough evidence of her true intentions to know that our marriage was effectively over. Instead of spending the next 3 days wallowing in self-pity or desperately trying to salvage something that had been deliberately sabotaged, I channeled my analytical nature into methodically dismantling the life we'd built together with the same precision I used to design network security protocols. My first call was to my coworker Brett, a fellow security analyst who'd been through his own messy divorce 2 years earlier and had repeatedly offered his spare bedroom if I ever needed it. Brett picked up on the second ring despite it being nearly midnight on Christmas Eve, listened to my abbreviated version of events without asking unnecessary questions, and told me to pack whatever I needed and come over immediately since his couch was more comfortable than whatever emotional minefield awaited me at home. I spent the remainder of Christmas Day moving my essential belongings to Brett's downtown apartment, a process that felt simultaneously liberating and devastating as I selected which pieces of my life were worth preserving versus which ones could be abandoned with the marriage. The systematic approach helped keep my emotions in check while I photographed every room in our condo, documented the contents of our joint bank accounts, and created detailed spreadsheets of our shared assets that would prove invaluable during divorce proceedings. Brett proved to be an invaluable ally during this process, having learned from his own experience that documentation was everything in divorce court, and he helped me photograph furniture, electronics, artwork, and even kitchen appliances while maintaining detailed lists of purchase dates and approximate values. On December 26th, I opened individual checking and savings accounts at a different bank, carefully calculating exactly half of our combined assets and transferring that amount while leaving clear paper trails that demonstrated I'd taken only what was rightfully mine. The process felt surreal, reducing 3 years of shared financial planning to a series of mathematical calculations, but I knew that being scrupulously fair now would protect me from accusations of financial misconduct later when Miranda's family inevitably painted me as the villain in their narrative. My methodical approach extended to scheduling consultations with 3 different divorce attorneys, researching their specialties, success rates, and client reviews with the same thoroughness I'd used to evaluate security software vendors for my company. The first attorney, recommended by Brett, specialized in high-conflict divorces and immediately understood the family dynamics I described, explaining that controlling in-laws often used emotional manipulation to maintain power over their adult children's relationships. During our consultation, she asked detailed questions about Miranda's family's financial involvement in our marriage, their attempts to influence major decisions, and any evidence I had of their interference, which prompted me to remember several incidents I'd previously dismissed as normal family closeness. The second attorney focused on asset protection and helped me understand how to safeguard my retirement accounts, stock options, and the small inheritance I'd received from my grandmother 2 years earlier, money that Miranda's family had repeatedly suggested should be used for a larger down payment on a house in their neighborhood. The third consultation provided perspective on timeline and strategy, explaining that Christmas Eve public humiliation followed by abandonment could actually work in my favor if properly documented, especially if I could demonstrate a pattern of emotional abuse and family interference. While researching our digital footprint for additional evidence of Miranda's deception, I made a discovery that transformed my understanding of just how long this betrayal had been building. Her laptop, which she'd left behind in her rush to stay at her mother's house, contained months of Facebook messages with her high school ex-boyfriend Marcus, conversations that had started as innocent catching up in September but had evolved into increasingly intimate emotional exchanges by November. The messages revealed that Marcus had been encouraging Miranda to leave me, telling her she deserved someone more ambitious and financially successful, someone who could give her the lifestyle her family expected rather than the modest but comfortable life we'd built together. Reading through their exchanges felt like watching my marriage disintegrate in real time, seeing how Marcus had systematically undermined my character while positioning himself as the understanding friend who truly appreciated Miranda's worth and potential. The most devastating messages were from early December, where Miranda confessed that she'd been feeling trapped in our marriage for months, that she resented my contentment with our current financial situation, and that she dreamed of being with someone who shared her family's values about success and social status. Marcus had responded by sharing photos of his new BMW, his recent promotion to regional sales manager, and his downtown Phoenix penthouse apartment, creating a stark contrast with our modest suburban condo and my practical Honda Civic. By December 15th, their conversations had become explicitly romantic, with Marcus telling Miranda he'd never stopped loving her and Miranda responding that she wished she'd never married me, that she'd settled for security instead of following her heart, and that she was planning to file for divorce after the holidays to avoid ruining Christmas for her family. The final message exchange, sent just hours before our Christmas Eve dinner, showed Marcus encouraging Miranda to provoke a fight that would justify her leaving, suggesting that if I reacted poorly to her family's criticism, she could claim I was unstable or aggressive and use that as grounds for divorce. Reading these messages felt like discovering that my entire marriage had been a performance, that the woman I'd loved and trusted had been systematically planning my destruction while accepting my love, my financial support, and my commitment to our shared future. The evidence was overwhelming and emotionally crushing, but it also provided exactly the ammunition I needed to protect myself in divorce court, since emotional affairs could be considered grounds for fault-based divorce in Arizona under certain circumstances. I printed every message, every photo, every exchange between Miranda and Marcus, creating a comprehensive timeline that showed premeditation, deception, and emotional adultery that had been carefully hidden while she maintained the facade of a loving wife. The documentation process felt like conducting a forensic investigation into the death of my own marriage, uncovering layer after layer of betrayal while maintaining the professional detachment that allowed me to function despite the emotional devastation. Brett found me at his kitchen table at 2 a.m. on December 27th, surrounded by printed messages and legal documents, methodically organizing evidence with the same attention to detail I brought to network security assessments. When he asked if I was okay, I realized that I actually was okay, or at least I would be, because discovering the truth about Miranda's character had eliminated any lingering doubt about whether our marriage could be saved, and I could finally stop hoping for reconciliation with someone who had never truly valued me in the first place. Miranda returned to our condo on December 28th expecting to find me devastated and apologetic, ready to beg forgiveness for embarrassing her family and promise to be more accommodating in the future, but instead she walked into half-empty rooms and faced a husband she no longer recognized. I was sitting at our dining room table with my laptop open, surrounded by legal documents and asset inventories, looking completely calm and composed as I worked through the final details of our separation with the methodical precision that had always annoyed her about my personality. The shock on her face when she saw the missing furniture, the gaps where my books and electronics had been, and the neat stacks of financial paperwork told me everything I needed to know about what she'd expected from this confrontation. She dropped her overnight bag by the door and stared at me like I was a stranger, clearly thrown off balance by my lack of emotional distress or desperate attempts to reconcile, and when she asked what I thought I was doing, I calmly informed her that I was filing for divorce and had already begun the process of separating our finances and assets. The transformation in her demeanor was immediate and predictable, shifting from confusion to anger as she demanded to know how I could make such a drastic decision without even trying to work things out or giving her a chance to explain what had happened at her mother's house. I listened to her rehearsed explanation about family stress, holiday pressure, and how she'd simply lost her temper in the moment, nodding politely while she attempted to minimize the significance of publicly humiliating me and then abandoning me on Christmas Eve. When she finished her performance, I quietly mentioned that I'd discovered her months of text messages with her mother planning my removal from their lives, as well as her inappropriate communications with Marcus that constituted an emotional affair under Arizona divorce law. The color drained from her face as she realized that her careful deception had been completely exposed, that all her manipulation and gaslighting had been rendered useless by her own digital carelessness, and that I possessed documentation of every betrayal she'd thought she'd successfully hidden. Her response cycled through the predictable stages of someone caught in an elaborate lie, starting with denials that became increasingly frantic as I calmly read specific quotes from her messages, then shifting to justifications about feeling unappreciated and misunderstood in our marriage. When denial and justification failed to move me, she attempted anger and intimidation, threatening to involve her family's connections in the legal community and warning me that I'd regret crossing the Rodriguez family, as if I hadn't already witnessed their capacity for manipulation and emotional warfare. The threats were followed by tears and pleading, with Miranda suddenly remembering how much she loved me and how we could work through any problems if I'd just give her another chance, conveniently forgetting the months she'd spent planning my destruction while accepting my love and financial support. I remained completely unmoved by her emotional manipulation, having learned through bitter experience that her tears and declarations of love were tactical weapons rather than genuine expressions of remorse or commitment. When she realized that neither threats nor tears would restore her control over the situation, Miranda shifted to practical concerns about logistics and finances, suddenly very interested in the details of asset division and support obligations that she'd never bothered to understand during our marriage. I showed her the comprehensive documentation I'd created, explaining that I'd divided everything exactly in half according to Arizona community property law, taking only what was legally mine while leaving detailed records of every decision to prevent future disputes. Her reaction to seeing the organized spreadsheets and legal paperwork revealed how little she'd understood about our actual financial situation, and she seemed genuinely surprised that I'd managed such a complex process without her input or approval. The conversation continued for nearly 2 hours, with Miranda cycling through every manipulation technique in her repertoire while I maintained the same calm, professional demeanor I used during network security briefings at work. She accused me of being cold and calculating, of throwing away 3 years of marriage over one bad night, of embarrassing her family and making her look foolish in front of her relatives who'd only been trying to help me understand my shortcomings. When I quietly pointed out that her own messages revealed months of premeditation and planning, that the Christmas Eve explosion had been deliberately provoked, and that she'd been emotionally involved with another man while pretending to be a loving wife, she finally stopped talking and stared at me with something that might have been respect mixed with genuine fear. The silence stretched between us for several minutes as Miranda apparently realized that the quiet, accommodating husband she'd taken for granted had been replaced by someone who couldn't be manipulated, threatened, or emotionally blackmailed into accepting her version of reality. When she asked what would happen next, I explained that my attorney would be filing the divorce petition within the week, that I'd be seeking dissolution based on irretrievable breakdown with consideration for her emotional misconduct, and that she should probably consult her own legal counsel rather than relying on her family's amateur advice about relationship dynamics. Her final attempt at regaining control came when she mentioned that Marcus had been just a friend offering emotional support during a difficult time in our marriage, that their conversations had been innocent and supportive rather than romantic or inappropriate. I responded by reading several of the more explicit messages between them, including Marcus's declarations of love and her responses about wishing she'd never married me, watching her face crumble as she realized that her definition of innocent friendship wouldn't hold up under legal scrutiny. As I gathered my laptop and documents to leave for Brett's apartment, Miranda asked if there was anything she could say or do to change my mind, and for the first time since returning home, her voice carried genuine emotion rather than calculated manipulation. I told her that the woman I'd married would never have publicly humiliated me, would never have planned my destruction while pretending to love me, and would never have carried on an emotional affair while accepting my commitment and support, so there was nothing left to save because the person I'd loved had never actually existed. Miranda's family launched their coordinated campaign within days of learning about the divorce filing, apparently believing they could pressure me into reconciliation through a combination of guilt trips, emotional manipulation, and veiled threats about their community connections. The first assault came from her brother Scott and his wife Paula, who showed up unannounced at Brett's apartment on New Year's Eve carrying a bottle of expensive wine and wearing expressions of concerned family members who just wanted to help resolve an unfortunate misunderstanding. Brett answered the door with barely concealed amusement, having predicted this exact scenario based on his own divorce experience, and he invited them in while texting me that the Rodriguez family cavalry had arrived for their intervention attempt. Scott positioned himself as the reasonable mediator, explaining that families sometimes say things they don't mean during stressful holidays, that Miranda had been under tremendous pressure at work and from their mother's expectations, and that everyone makes mistakes when emotions run high during family gatherings. Paula took the supportive sister-in-law approach, emphasizing how much Miranda loved me and how devastated she'd been since I moved out, how she cried constantly and barely ate anything, and how she kept asking what she could do to fix things between us. I listened politely to their carefully rehearsed presentation while internally marveling at how they could ignore months of premeditated deception and emotional adultery in favor of painting this as a simple miscommunication that could be resolved with better family dynamics. When they finished their pitch, I calmly explained that I'd discovered evidence of Miranda's long-term planning to end our marriage, her emotional affair with her ex-boyfriend, and her family's active participation in undermining our relationship for months before the Christmas Eve explosion. Scott's expression shifted from concern to defensive as he insisted that family input wasn't interference, that they'd only wanted what was best for Miranda, and that perhaps I'd misinterpreted normal family closeness as something more sinister than intended. Paula tried to minimize the significance of Miranda's communications with Marcus, suggesting that reconnecting with old friends was natural and healthy, that emotional support during marital difficulties wasn't the same as having an affair, and that I was probably overreacting to innocent conversations between people who'd known each other since high school. Their attempts at gaslighting might have worked 6 months earlier when I still doubted my own perceptions and prioritized keeping peace over protecting my dignity, but the documented evidence of systematic betrayal had eliminated any uncertainty about what I'd experienced and endured. When I showed them printed copies of Miranda's text messages with her mother discussing divorce strategies and her explicit romantic communications with Marcus, including plans to provoke the Christmas Eve confrontation, both Scott and Paula fell silent and exchanged uncomfortable glances that confirmed they'd known more about the situation than they'd initially admitted. Diane escalated her own pressure campaign through a series of increasingly aggressive phone calls and emails, alternating between threats about destroying my professional reputation and guilt trips about abandoning her daughter during a vulnerable time in her life. She contacted my supervisor at work claiming I'd made inappropriate comments about Hispanic families during company social events, a completely fabricated accusation that my boss immediately dismissed after reviewing my personnel file and speaking with colleagues who'd witnessed my respectful interactions with everyone regardless of background. Her threats extended to social media campaigns designed to damage my reputation in our shared community, warning that she had friends in real estate, banking, and local government who could make my life very difficult if I continued pursuing divorce proceedings against her innocent daughter. The desperation behind these threats revealed how much power and control the Rodriguez family was accustomed to wielding over Miranda's relationships, and how shocked they were to encounter someone who couldn't be intimidated or manipulated into compliance with their expectations. The most unexpected ally in this family war turned out to be Miranda's grandmother Rose, an 82-year-old woman who'd remained largely silent during previous family gatherings but apparently had been observing the dynamics with sharp-eyed wisdom for years. Rose called me directly one evening in early January, speaking with the clarity and directness that often comes with age and experience, explaining that she'd watched Diane control and manipulate her children for decades and had been waiting for someone to finally stand up to the family's toxic patterns. She revealed that Diane had intercepted and redirected funds that Miranda's grandfather had left specifically for her wedding, using the money instead to maintain control over her daughter's choices and ensuring that Miranda remained financially dependent on family approval for major life decisions. Rose provided me with copies of bank records and legal documents that showed how Diane had systematically undermined Miranda's financial independence while positioning herself as the generous mother who sacrificed everything for her children's happiness and security. The evidence Rose shared demonstrated a pattern of financial manipulation that extended far beyond my marriage, showing how Diane had used money as a weapon to maintain control over her adult children's relationships, career choices, and living situations for years. When Rose asked why I wasn't fighting harder to save my marriage, I explained the documented evidence of Miranda's deception and emotional affair, expecting her to defend her granddaughter or minimize the significance of what I'd discovered. Instead, Rose nodded sadly and told me that she'd suspected Miranda was following her mother's playbook of manipulation and control, that she'd hoped marriage might help Miranda develop independence and healthy relationship patterns, but that Diane's influence had apparently proven too strong to overcome. Rose's final piece of advice stayed with me long after our conversation ended. She warned me that the Rodriguez family would never stop trying to control the narrative around our divorce, that they'd paint me as the villain who abandoned their beloved Miranda, and that my only protection was maintaining detailed documentation while refusing to engage in their emotional manipulation and guilt campaigns. Her validation of everything I'd experienced and observed gave me the confidence to ignore the family's escalating pressure tactics, knowing that at least one person in Miranda's circle understood the truth about what had really destroyed our marriage and why reconciliation was impossible with someone who'd chosen family loyalty over basic honesty and respect. My attorney proved to be exactly the right choice for navigating the legal proceedings while Miranda's family-hired lawyers struggled against my meticulous documentation and the overwhelming evidence of her misconduct throughout our marriage. Patricia Martinez specialized in high-conflict divorces involving family interference and had immediately understood the dynamics at play when I first described Diane's controlling behavior and Miranda's systematic deception over several months. During our initial strategy session, Patricia explained that emotional affairs combined with evidence of premeditated planning to destroy the marriage could significantly impact the division of assets in Arizona, especially when one party had been secretly preparing for divorce while accepting the other's financial support and emotional investment. The discovery process revealed just how thorough my documentation had been compared to Miranda's complete lack of preparation, since she'd apparently expected me to remain passive and accommodating rather than fight back with organized evidence and professional legal representation. Her attorney, a family friend recommended by Diane, seemed unprepared for the volume of text messages, financial records, and digital communications I'd preserved, and their initial strategy of portraying me as an unreasonable husband who couldn't handle legitimate family input quickly collapsed under the weight of documented proof. Patricia systematically presented the evidence of Miranda's emotional affair with Marcus, showing the progression from innocent reconnection to explicit romantic planning, including discussions about their future together once she'd successfully ended our marriage through deliberate provocation. The timeline Patricia constructed demonstrated that Miranda had been living a double life for months, accepting my love and financial support while actively planning my replacement and discussing strategies to make me appear unstable or unreasonable during the inevitable confrontation. Miranda's attorney attempted to argue that family input wasn't interference and that reconnecting with old friends wasn't grounds for fault-based divorce, but the explicit romantic content of her communications with Marcus made their relationship impossible to dismiss as innocent friendship or emotional support during marital difficulties. The evidence of Diane's financial manipulation provided by Rose proved particularly damaging to their case, showing a pattern of family interference that extended beyond normal concern into active sabotage of Miranda's marriage and financial independence. When Miranda's attorney tried to paint me as controlling or financially abusive, Patricia countered with documentation showing that I'd consistently encouraged Miranda's career development, supported her financial independence, and maintained transparent joint accounts that she'd had full access to throughout our marriage. The contrast between my organized financial records and Miranda's inability to account for her spending or contribution to our household became increasingly obvious as the proceedings continued, undermining their attempts to portray me as the primary problem in our relationship dynamics. 3 months into the divorce process, I received the promotion to senior analyst that I'd been working toward for over a year, complete with an $18,000 salary increase and the opportunity to lead my own team on critical infrastructure projects. The timing felt symbolic, representing the new chapter one was building while Miranda's life apparently continued spiraling downward according to updates I received through mutual friends and colleagues. My increased income allowed me to move into a downtown Phoenix loft with spectacular city views, modern appliances, and space for the home office I'd always wanted but couldn't afford while supporting Miranda's expensive lifestyle and family obligations. The contrast between my improving circumstances and Miranda's deteriorating situation became even more pronounced when Patricia informed me that Marcus had decided not to leave his wife after all, apparently having second thoughts about the financial and social costs of divorce once the excitement of a secret affair wore off and reality set in. Miranda had apparently been counting on Marcus following through with his promises about their future together, and his sudden withdrawal left her facing divorce proceedings without the emotional and financial support she'd been expecting from her affair partner. The final settlement negotiations reflected the strength of my legal position, with Patricia securing terms that were slightly more favorable than the standard 50-50 split due to the documented evidence of Miranda's misconduct and her family's interference in our marriage. I retained full ownership of my retirement accounts and the small inheritance from my grandmother, kept my newer car and computer equipment, and received a larger share of our savings to compensate for the emotional distress and legal costs associated with her deception. Miranda accepted the settlement with minimal resistance, apparently eager to finalize the divorce and move on from a situation that had become increasingly embarrassing as more details of her behavior became known to friends and extended family members. The judge's final decree included specific language about the emotional affair and family interference that would become part of the public record, effectively documenting the truth about what had destroyed our marriage despite whatever alternative narrative the Rodriguez family might try to promote in their social circles. 6 months after that devastating Christmas Eve dinner, I was officially divorced, financially secure, professionally successful, and living independently in a space that reflected my actual preferences rather than compromises designed to keep peace with demanding in-laws. The freedom to make decisions based on my own values and goals rather than constant pressure from Miranda's family felt almost surreal after years of walking on eggshells and accepting criticism for my career choices, lifestyle preferences, and fundamental personality traits. 2 years after that Christmas Eve explosion that ended my marriage, I was living a life I couldn't have imagined while trapped in the Rodriguez family's web of manipulation and control, having built genuine happiness with someone who valued me for exactly who I was rather than trying to reshape me into their vision of an acceptable partner. Sophia Chen entered my life through work when she joined our company as a financial advisor specializing in cybersecurity investments, bringing both professional expertise and personal warmth that made our initial collaboration feel effortless and natural from the very first project meeting. Our relationship developed slowly and organically, starting with coffee discussions about market trends and security protocols, progressing to dinner conversations about books, travel, and life goals, and eventually becoming the kind of partnership I'd never experienced during my marriage to Miranda. Sophia possessed the financial independence and career focus that Miranda had always claimed to want but never actually pursued, building her client base through genuine expertise rather than family connections or social manipulation, and she immediately understood the technical aspects of my work in ways that Miranda had never bothered to learn despite 3 years of marriage. The contrast between Sophia's genuine interest in my projects and Miranda's dismissive attitude toward my career became especially apparent when Sophia started attending company social events and asking detailed questions about network architecture, threat assessment protocols, and the intellectual challenges that made my work rewarding rather than just tolerable. 6 months into our relationship, Sophia invited me to dinner with her family at their home in Scottsdale, and I found myself experiencing anxiety about meeting another set of parents and relatives who might judge my career, my background, or my worthiness as a partner for their accomplished daughter. The evening started pleasantly enough with her mother preparing an elaborate Chinese-American fusion meal while her father, a successful engineering consultant, discussed industry trends and technological developments with the kind of genuine curiosity that had been completely absent from my interactions with the Rodriguez family. However, the tone shifted noticeably when Sophia's father began questioning my salary, my advancement prospects, and whether network security was really a sustainable career path given the rapid pace of technological change and the outsourcing of technical jobs to overseas contractors. His questions carried an undertone of skepticism that reminded me uncomfortably of Diane's interrogations, and I felt the familiar knot of anxiety forming in my stomach as I prepared to defend my professional choices to yet another family who seemed predetermined to find me inadequate. Sophia's response was swift, decisive, and absolutely transformative in terms of my understanding of what healthy relationship boundaries actually looked like when properly enforced by someone who truly cared about their partner's dignity and emotional well-being. She immediately interrupted her father's questioning to explain that Kevin's work was highly specialized and critically important, that he'd recently been promoted to senior analyst with significant salary increases, and that his expertise in cybersecurity made him extremely valuable in an increasingly digital economy where data protection was essential for every major corporation. When her father continued pushing about financial stability and long-term career prospects, Sophia's voice became firm and unmistakably warning as she told him that Kevin's professional accomplishments spoke for themselves and that she wouldn't tolerate any disrespectful comments about someone she cared about deeply. The transformation in the room's dynamics was immediate and striking, with Sophia's father backing down from his aggressive questioning while her mother quickly redirected the conversation towards safer topics like travel plans and restaurant recommendations that didn't involve critical analysis of my career worthiness. As we drove home that evening, Sophia apologized for her father's behavior and explained that he sometimes became overly protective when meeting her boyfriends, but that she'd made it clear that disrespecting me wasn't acceptable regardless of his intentions or concerns about her relationship choices. Her willingness to establish and enforce boundaries with her own family, even when it created temporary tension or awkwardness, showed me what genuine partnership looked like when someone actually valued their relationship more than family approval or social harmony. The contrast with Miranda's behavior during family conflicts was absolutely stark and emotionally overwhelming, highlighting how much emotional damage I'd sustained from years of being thrown under the bus whenever her family decided to attack my character, career, or fundamental adequacy as a human being. Sophia's protective response also made me realize how completely I'd normalized Miranda's failure to defend me against her family's constant criticism, how I'd convinced myself that family loyalty was more important than marital partnership, and how much of my self-esteem had been eroded by accepting treatment that no one should have to endure in a healthy relationship. Over the following months, I watched Sophia navigate various family situations with the same firm boundary setting that she demonstrated during that first dinner, consistently prioritizing our relationship while maintaining respectful connections with her parents and siblings who learned to treat me with basic courtesy and respect. Her approach to family dynamics revealed that it was entirely possible to love your family while refusing to allow them to mistreat your partner, that healthy relationships required protecting each other from external criticism and manipulation, and that someone who truly valued you would never sacrifice your dignity to maintain family peace. The security and confidence I felt in Sophia's support allowed me to recognize how much emotional energy I'd wasted during my marriage trying to win approval from people who were determined to find me inadequate regardless of my accomplishments, efforts, or fundamental character as a person. Meanwhile, mutual friends occasionally provided updates about Miranda's situation that painted a picture of someone still struggling to rebuild her life after destroying her marriage for a relationship that had never materialized into the salvation she'd been expecting. According to these reports, Miranda had moved back in with Diane after a series of failed relationships and job changes, apparently unable to maintain the independent lifestyle she'd claimed to want during our divorce proceedings, and she developed a reputation in their social circle as someone whose relationships ended badly due to unrealistic expectations and family interference. The irony of her situation wasn't lost on me, since she'd sacrificed a stable marriage with someone who genuinely loved her in pursuit of excitement and status that had proven to be completely illusory, leaving her worse off than when we'd first met and still dependent on her mother's approval and financial support. Looking back on that Christmas Eve confrontation that shattered my marriage, I realize now that Miranda's explosive reaction had actually been a gift, forcing me to see the toxic family dynamics I'd been tolerating and the fundamental lack of respect that had characterized our relationship from the beginning. The public humiliation and abandonment that felt so devastating at the time had revealed Miranda's true character and priorities in a way that years of subtle manipulation and gradual erosion might never have accomplished, giving me the clarity I needed to recognize that our marriage had been built on my willingness to accept unacceptable treatment rather than genuine mutual love and respect. I'd spent months after the divorce analyzing what had gone wrong, wondering if I could have handled family conflicts differently or been more accommodating to Diane's concerns about my adequacy as a son-in-law, but Sophia's unwavering support helped me understand that the problem had never been my behavior or character flaws. The Rodriguez family's treatment of me had been systematically designed to maintain control over Miranda while ensuring that I remained grateful for whatever scraps of acceptance they occasionally offered, and my attempts to win their approval had only reinforced their belief that I was lucky to be included in their family rather than someone who deserved basic respect and courtesy. Miranda's willingness to participate in this dynamic and her ultimate choice to prioritize family loyalty over marital partnership had demonstrated that she'd never truly seen me as an equal partner worthy of protection and defense against external criticism and manipulation. The gradual realization that I'd been grieving the loss of our relationship for months before it officially ended helped explain why the divorce proceedings felt more like relief than devastation, since I'd already mourned the death of whatever genuine connection we'd once shared while watching it deteriorate under family pressure and her growing resentment about my failure to transform into their vision of an acceptable partner. Sophia's response to her father's criticism had shown me what healthy relationship dynamics actually looked like when someone genuinely valued their partner's well-being over family harmony, and the contrast highlighted how much emotional damage I'd sustained by normalizing Miranda's failure to establish appropriate boundaries with her controlling mother and judgmental relatives. The months I'd spent walking on eggshells and accepting criticism about my career, personality, and fundamental worth as a human being had gradually eroded my self-confidence and sense of reality, making me doubt my own perceptions while trying desperately to become someone who might finally earn the Rodriguez family's approval and acceptance. My relationship with Sophia had restored my understanding of what mutual respect and genuine partnership felt like, showing me that love should enhance rather than diminish your sense of self-worth, and that the right person would appreciate your strengths rather than constantly highlighting your perceived inadequacies and shortcomings. The security I felt with someone who actively protected our relationship from external interference allowed me to recognize how much energy I'd wasted trying to prove myself worthy of love rather than simply being loved for who I already was, and how Miranda's version of love had always been conditional on my willingness to accept her family's judgment about my value and potential. 3 years of marriage had taught me invaluable lessons about recognizing manipulation, setting boundaries, and refusing to accept treatment that undermined my dignity and self-respect, even when that treatment came disguised as family concern or constructive criticism designed to help me improve as a person and partner. The documentation skills I developed during divorce proceedings had proven useful in other areas of life, helping me maintain clear records of important decisions and communications while protecting myself from people who might try to gaslight or manipulate me in professional or personal situations. Most importantly, I'd learned to trust my own perceptions about how I deserved to be treated rather than second-guessing my reactions when someone's behavior felt disrespectful or deliberately hurtful, since my instincts about the Rodriguez family's toxic dynamics had been completely accurate despite their attempts to convince me otherwise. The courage to walk away from that Christmas Eve confrontation without arguing or defending myself had been the first step toward reclaiming my self-respect and building a life based on my actual values rather than constant compromise with people who viewed my accommodation as weakness rather than strength. Miranda's final attempt to reconnect through social media had been automatically filtered into my blocked messages folder, since I'd learned that maintaining no contact was essential for moving forward rather than getting drawn back into familiar patterns of guilt, manipulation, and false hope about reconciliation with someone who'd fundamentally demonstrated their inability to value what we'd built together. Sometimes people reveal exactly who they are during moments of crisis, and the wisdom lies in believing their revelation immediately rather than hoping they'll transform into someone capable of the love and respect you deserve, because that transformation rarely happens when someone's behavior stems from deep-seated family patterns and personal values that prioritize control over genuine connection.